Hi guys, today's tutorial is how to paint these waves using gouache paint. So I have all my supplies here. I'm using Canon watercolor paper, I have a palette, 2 jars of water and something to dry my brushes off on. These are the brushes that I am mostly using for this painting. As for my paint, I like to use Winsor Newton gouache and also Art Spectrum gouache, and the most important thing to have is a spray bottle. So let's just start with the painting that I did the other day. So if you look at the sky, there is a transition from light blue to white to yellow to a warmish orange red and then to a purple. So to start off, we're going to start with the sky, but before we do that, we just want to pencil in where the halfway line is, so where the sky meets the water. And then once we have that, we can start laying some paint on our palette. So I'm using primary blue, I have spectrum red, primary red, and also the permanent yellow deep. So to start off, I'm getting a flat brush and I've wet it with a bit of water. Then I want to mix the blue with white and create a really light blue. So I want to mostly use white and just the tiniest bit of blue. And then I'm going to sweep that across the top of the page. If you find that the paint is too thick and it's not spreading, you just add a little bit more water, but if it becomes too diluted, make sure you balance it out with enough paint as well so that the paint isn't too sheer. So once I start layering that color on, then I want to just keep adding white to the mixture, so I'm transitioning from blue to a lighter color. And then now I'm picking up just pure white paint and I'm just sweeping it in, so I'm trying to blend that out. So to get a smooth transition, I want to wash off my brush completely and just pick up some white paint, then start to fade out that harsh line there. So I'm using white paint to blend it into the light blue that we already have. And if you just keep using this motion to blend out the colors, it'll start to fade together really smoothly and it'll look like a really smooth transition. And after that, I want to wash off my brush again, and this time I want to start transitioning it into the yellowy orange color. So I'm mixing white with some of the permanent yellow deep, and I'm going to just start sweeping that color on just below where that white is. So just lightly brushing it on and trying to blend it in. Then I'm going to slowly add more yellow to the paint so it gets a little bit darker. And again, I just use this same motion to try and blend out the colors really softly. Now when I look at my painting, I can see there's a bit of a harsh line where the blue meets the white. So now I'm picking up a smaller brush. This is a 1/4 inch flat brush and it's a clean brush. So I'm just going to go in with some really light blue paint and I'm just trying to blend out this part. So if you notice that some parts of your sky don't look so well blended, you can also do the same thing. So just pick up a smaller clean brush, then try and pick up the color that is in between the two different areas that you feel like don't blend together well, and just start to lay it on really lightly and try to blend that out. Now I'm back to my bigger flat brush and I've picked up some of the spectrum red and I've mixed it into the orange mixture. So I'm starting to move towards more of an warmer orangey reddish glow. And if the line looks really harsh right now, just keep blending it, but make sure you don't bring it up too high, otherwise you'll end up covering the whole area. So instead what you want to do is again pick up a clean brush, maybe a smaller brush, and start to blend it out. So you can either use a clean brush and just try and blend it as is, or you could try to pick up a bit of color that's in between those two colors and try and lay that on top while blending it in. So during this process, I am going back and forth between the palette, the painting, and then also cleaning off my brush quite often, because once my brush starts to pick up some colors on the paper, I want to wash it off, otherwise it will start to muddy the colors if I'm laying on too much at once. And now I'm using a smaller brush to do the rest of the sky. So I'm picking up some of the spectrum red again, mixed it with a little bit of white so it's more of a bit of a pinkish color, and then I'm going to start blending that part out as well. So when I blend with gouache, I don't really blend it on the paper, so I wouldn't blend yellow and red on the paper and try to mix orange. Instead, I would try to lay in all the colors that I want. So instead of going from yellow straight to red and hoping for an orange in between, I would pick up yellow, then lay in orange, and then red, and then just try to smooth out the lines in between. because I find that when you work with gouache, it does dry quite quickly on the paper, which doesn't leave you a lot of time to blend. So the smoothest blends is from trying to lay in all the colors that you want and then just trying to blend out in between as much as you can. So then I just spend a bit of time just kind of going back and forth. So wherever I see that the line isn't so smooth, then I'll try and match the in-between color and lay that in. So now I want to blend out the harsh line between where the light color meets the warmer orange color. So I've picked up just a little bit of white and some really light yellow, and then I've just swept it across the whole thing to try and blend that part out smoothly. And then I go in with a little brush and I'm just trying to blend it out even more smoothly. So this part can be a little bit tedious. There is a lot of going back and forth, and it's really up to you how smoothly you want to have it blended out. I'm a little bit pedantic about it, and I like to try and make it as smooth as possible, but sometimes I also have to tell myself to stop and not to overdo it, because if you start to overdo it with gouache, it starts to lift up off the paper. So since gouache is reactivated with water, the more you try to layer on top, the more you have to be careful. So you have to be really light-handed when you're trying to blend things out, because if you go in with a really heavy hand, you'll end up picking up too much of the colors underneath and it could just make it look a little funny. So now I want to start blending it into the purple. So I am using primary blue and I've mixed it with primary red. So instead of mixing the primary blue with the spectrum red, which is a warm red, I want to mix it with a cool red, which is the primary red. And the reason I want to mix it with the cool red is because it'll give me a much more vibrant color. So I've mixed the blue with the cool red, and then now I am blending that in. So I'm laying on the purple and I will start to lighten it a little bit and slowly bring that up into the reddish color that I have on the paper. And once I've laid down the purple, now I want to start blending it out. So I'm going to do that by laying on some of the red. So I used a spectrum red now and I mix it with a little bit of white, so it becomes more of a muted color. And I am trying to match the in-between color and just try and blend that out. And by adding white, you can start to mute out the color a little so it's not as bright, and that way it'll start to blend more smoothly. So I spent around 20 minutes just trying to get this sky right, so do take your time when you're painting this part. It might look simple and straightforward, but it takes a lot of work trying to really get some smooth blends. So just take your time, and if you think it's at a point where you're happy with it, then just leave it. It's better to leave it than to start to overdo it. Now we're ready to move on to the water. So for this part, the first thing I want to do is just lay in the base color. So I'm going to lay in a really light grayish blue. So to do that, I'm mixing primary blue with the tiniest bit of black and mixing a lot of white into it. So it's a grayish kind of blue, and you want to be really light-handed when you're adding in black, because if you add too much, it'll just overthrow all the blue and it'll turn gray. So just add it a little bit at a time, and then once you have achieved this kind of light grayish blue color, you can start to lay it in and just have a little bit of a transition in it. So at the bottom, you want it to just be the slightest bit darker, and it just starts to get a little bit lighter as you move towards the horizon line. And after that, then I want to get black paint and just put some black paint in between where the horizon line is, so where the sky meets the water. And once you have that in, now I'm going to paint in the sun. So I'm using pure white paint and I've just dotted in the center of the sun. Then I just want to paint a circle for where it is. So by using pure white paint, it makes it look really bright. And then around the outside, I want to just give it a bit of a glow. So I'm using an orangey color and I'm just outlining around it, so it looks as though the sun is glowing. So before we move on to painting the waves, I just want to quickly explain what we're trying to achieve. So there's only two things to keep in mind. The first is that when you look at a wave, the darkest part is at the top. Then it starts to get lighter and lighter as you move down. And then the brightest highlight is just above where the darkest part sits. And then the second thing to keep in mind is that the waves start off bigger and then they get smaller as you move further away. So if you know those two things, then it'll make it a lot easier for you to understand how to paint these waves. So to start, we're going to mix the darkest color first. So I'm mixing black with blue, and then I'm going to start indicating where the waves are. So you can feel free to just put these in wherever you like. You don't have to follow exactly what I'm doing. So I'm just imagining where some of these waves would sit. So they kind of just look like little triangles. And the only thing that I'm keeping in mind is that as I move closer to the horizon line, I'm making sure that they get smaller. And for this part, I also want to work in sections. So after I've done the first bit, then I want to start sort of filling out the shape. So as I said before, we want the shadows to start to get lighter and lighter as we move down. So I'm mixing more white into the paint and I'm starting to bring it down so that it gets lighter and lighter. And then I just want to try and blend that out smoothly. It doesn't matter if it's not too smooth, we'll come back and fix it up later. So I'm just making sure that it starts to go from dark to a lighter color. And then I want to do the same for all the other ones as well. I want to start with the dark color and then just lay in some of the lighter colors and just bring it down a little bit. So when I'm painting this, at this point I feel like it looks funny, but I think every painting has an ugly stage and you just have to keep going through it, and once you hit a certain stage then things will start to look right. But for now it'll just look funny, like you won't really see what the waves should be like, but you just have to keep going. So I'm using the dark paint again and I'm putting in some more waves. So I'm working in sections. I've done the first part and now I want to move on to the second part. So I'm slowly building it up. And then I just want to keep adding these dark shadows, and as I move towards the back I want to make sure that my hand is really light and that the lines that I'm doing start to get shorter and thinner so it looks like really distant waves. And then below the ones that are a little bit closer to us, I'll add in a bit of a lighter color, so it's a transition from dark to light. And now I'm picking up a bit of a lighter blue, but one that's still darker than the base layer we've laid in, and I start to just put in some more waves as well, making sure that they get a lot smaller the further away they are. And if it helps, you can also use a liner brush to draw in those waves that are further away, but the brush that I have comes to a really fine tip, so it does a good job of doing really thin, fine lines. So after this stage, I want to go in and start to really darken the top of the wave. So I'm picking up the dark paint again and I'm making it even darker than before, and I'm really just outlining the top. And that's because if you can imagine a wave, as it starts to move upwards, it's blocking the light, so there is a shadow up the top, and then as it sort of goes down it starts to get lighter. So I really want to emphasize that dark shadow up the top, so then I start to lay that in, and then I also want to make sure that I blend it out just a little bit so it's not so harsh. Now I want to try and slightly blend out the very top of the wave, so I don't want it to have quite a harsh dark shadow. I want to just lay in a color that is slightly lighter than the shadow and just try and blend that out just a little bit, so that way it looks a little bit more natural. So I'll go ahead and do that to the first section of the waves that I've painted, and then from then on I am just going to repeat this process on the rest of the waves. In this next stage, we're going to start to bring everything together. So we want to mix a lighter blue color, but one that's still a little bit darker than the base layer. And we are going to just lay that at the bottom of each wave. And the only thing that I'm making sure to do is to not let it actually hit the top of the next wave. So I don't want it to hit where the dark shadow is up the top. I want to leave sort of a glow in between it, so that way it looks like there's a highlight just above each of the waves, and that'll give it much more of a realistic look. And we just want to try and sort of join all the waves together, so we want to fill in all the space in between. And so I'll just go through and do all of that, and then after this stage you'll see that everything really starts to come together. So just move through and just add in that lighter paint, and you can also try and blend things out at this stage. Now we're up to one of my favorite parts, which is adding in the glow from the sky. So we want to pick a color from the sky, so for example the orange, and we want to start reflecting that into the water. So I've mixed a light orange color and I'm just placing that on top of each of the waves. So I'm just going ahead and adding that as a highlight, and that way it looks as though the sky is really reflecting into the water. So I'm just going around and just putting that in, and for the area that's near the horizon line, I just put in some orange strokes as well. After I've added in the orange, I want to start to add in some yellow as well. So I want to add in these yellow highlights just above where I placed the orange highlights, but this time I want to be a bit more selective about where I place it. So I want to place it more towards the center, so it's more as though it's the rays coming from the sun. And now for my favorite part of the painting, we are going to add in pure white paint to indicate where the sunlight is really hitting the water and where the water is really shining and glimmering. So I'm just using white paint and I'm starting to dot it in. So it starts off small and then it gets a little bit bigger as we move closer. So I want to dot these in above the top of each wave, so where the yellow paint is sitting, and I just go ahead and dot it in. And this really is the last step that ties the whole painting together, so it makes it look like the water is glowing and glimmering from the sunlight hitting it. At this stage, I want to zoom out and just take a look at my painting and see where are some areas that I can add in a little bit more or fix it up. So I decided that I just wanted to add in a bit more shadows and just fill in the water a bit more so it doesn't look so bare towards the horizon line. So I'm just adding on a little bit of touch-ups, but that is pretty much it. So we've finished this painting and this is the final look. So I actually painted two of these. One of them I did last week and this one I painted just for the tutorial. Now the blue is a little bit different. I think in the first one I must have used a warmer blue, so maybe an ultramarine blue mixed with black, whereas in the second one I was using phthalo blue, which is a much cooler blue. So depending on which kind of look you like better, you can select which blue you want to use, but I think both of them suit this scene quite well. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this video helpful. If you try it out, please tag me on Instagram. I would really love to see it, and I hope you all have a really nice day. See you in the next video.